Hello, I'm following up on the the presentation I made about what is political science according to Aristotle. And at one point in there, I said I was getting into the question of just because we have this word that's political and it sounds very similar to politique, obviously it came from that, or the Latin politicus, or the doesn't mean that we can assume that it means the same thing in English as it does in that language. And I said that I originally assumed that political came from the word or politique, the adjective So it's the adjective, the feminine adjective, so politique. The masculine is politikos, and then the neuter is politikon, and in plural politika. So this is an adjective, but what is it? What is the content? What does it mean? And I assumed it derived from the word polis originally. I thought that. Then at some point, a couple of years ago, I had the brilliant idea that it came not from polis, because I said, well, it's politic. Polis is polis, but politic. But there's the Greek word polites, which is a person, and usually means citizen. So it's kind of like a person who is an inhabitant of a polis. So I thought, well, maybe a politique. This is not exactly advanced linguistics, but I thought maybe it makes more sense that politikos, politikon comes from polites than polis. Where did the T come from? So anyway, with that advanced method of thinking, I then checked the very big Greek dictionary, and it seemed to support my view. Now, however, to be sure about this, you would have to do some serious linguistic research, which shouldn't take too long. And in fact, there's probably people in the world right now who know the answer. In fact, come to think of it, if my friend and mentor, Arthur W.H. Adkins, professor at University of Chicago, author of Merit and Responsibility, were still alive, I would ask him this very thing, and he would either know the answer or he would know how to get it. So then, now what? But then B, would it make any difference? Because polites comes from polis, so they're connected. It's not like completely different subjects. But here's why I concluded it did make a difference, and that is a polites. If polites means citizen, then if the polis, the political community, is ruled by a king, then the people that live in it are not citizens, but they are subjects. So therefore, that would make the word political strongly connected to not just any old polis, but a polis that has citizens. And in order for there to be citizens, power must be divided among, it has to be more than one person ruling. One person ruling is a kingship, and therefore, and the people are subjects. Now, and as a matter of fact, and this is what I guess the main thing I'll be talking about today, is that Aristotle does distinguish three kinds of rule. Oh yeah, the old glass situation. So, well, I may be taking them off. Yeah, let me just see. Well, I can't see a thing. But anyway, three kinds of rule, because he distinguishes between the word for rule is arche, like arche, and there's politike arche, there's basilike arche, which means roughly, basileus is a king, and so that if you have the rule of a king, it means rule of one person. That is different from politike arche. And the third kind is despotic arche, and that's the rule where whoever's ruling, the people that he is ruling are not free men. They are slaves. So, and despotes means master. So it comes from the idea in the family. There's the master of the slaves. That's the head of the household. They have some slaves, and he's the master. Um, so um, so that basically divides forms of rule into unfree, where the people you're ruling over are slaves, and free, where the people you're ruling over are free men. And that rule is then divided into: is it one person ruling over all the free men in the polis or anywhere, or is the rule divided among people, either into a few people, which might be an oligarchy, or many people, a democracy or something? So in that case, you have citizens. So speaking in terms of forms of ruling free people, there is what Aristotle calls politicae arche and basilicae arche. So there's this. He makes a big deal about whether you have one person in charge or the power is divided among a number of people. And I think part of that is that if you're going to divide it among a number of people, you have to then start introducing rules and stuff. And so the rule of law gets involved in that, and so on. So for him, it's a big difference. Makes a big difference. Now, he's not opposed to one person rule, but he does say that if you're going to have one person ruling, if it's to be a good thing, then you have to meet certain conditions. But that means that political rule, politicae arche, then doesn't apply to kingships. So therefore, not every polis has politai, citizens, and so that means is politicae, the science of politics or whatever, is that specifically dealing with the science of ruling in societies where you have citizens, where power is divided. Now, this is not completely crazy, because particularly in Plato, he talks about politicae, because the notion of politicae, the science of politics, goes back to Plato, and maybe even to the sophists. But he talks about politicae versus basilicae, and he treats them as being virtually equivalent in value. But the idea is that there is the notion of a special science for one man rule, and that is different from the science of divided rule. And if politicae refers to the divided rule, then that would mean that politicae does not mean political. It means something like citizenly. It's more narrow. However, in the end, I would say that we don't need to worry about it. So if you're totally confused, in the end, many words in Aristotle and in the world in general get used in narrow and broader terms, and that makes a challenge in interpreting things. Like the word politeia, which is connected to this, and that the politeia is usually translated constitution, or if you're a Straussian, you translate it regime, and if you're one of these more recent people, you say it's political system. But it's constitution in the old British sense of the structure of the society, which may or may not be reflected in a written document. So it's not in the American sense of constitution, which some idea it's a piece of parchment with a bunch of words on it. No, the constitution meaning the structure of the society, the political system. So politeia in Aristotle sometimes means any kind of political system. Other times it means specifically, and this would be connected to the word, what I was just talking about, namely, it's referring to specifically what we would call republics. And by republic, I mean in the sense of not a monarchy. So, for example, the English word republic actually has various meanings. But one of the common meanings is there's no king anymore, or there is no emperor. So the Irish Republican Army has the word Republican in there because they don't want to have the Queen. So to be a republic, all you have to do is not have a king. So England is not a republic, and Denmark, I guess, is not a republic, but Iran is a republic because theoretically they don't have any king. Um, whereas under the Shah, it was not a republic because he was like the monarch. Anyway, so the word politeia is used to mean any kind of constitution or political system. Aristotle also uses it to mean just republican political systems. And so monarchy is not a politeia in that sense. So it means political systems where there are politei, citizens. And then, of course, to make life more difficult, there's a third meaning, and it's a certain kind of politeia in the second meaning. It's one where, and the funny thing is that sometimes it's one where it's like a mixed system where it's a mixture of oligarchy elements and democratic elements, and it's tempered and arranged in a certain way that makes it stable. And that's sometimes translated as republic, but I think it's better to say that's a polity. So the word politeia has three meanings. The most generic meaning is any political system whatsoever. Secondly, it means those political systems which do not have kings, so republics. And then third, it means those republics that are a combination of democracy and oligarchy and various checks and balances and stuff, which is related to when people in the United States say, the United States is not a republic. There used to be big billboards that you would drive. United States, I think maybe the John Birch Society that put them up, but the United States is not a democracy, it's a republic. And as a matter of fact, the people that created the country went into great detail about trying to make it something that was not democratic in a certain sense. It has checks and balances, has an element of democracy, an element of oligarchy, like the House and the Senate, and then an element of kingship, which is like the president. So anyway, so the point here is that many words used by Aristotle and many used by Plato and everybody have larger and smaller meanings, and so that's the challenge of interpretation, that you have to be able to figure out how is this word meant in this situation, and so how you go about deciding that is another matter. So the reason why if you start saying politike is related to polites and not to polis, then not any old polis is related to politics or politike, but only those that have citizens that are not monarchies. Anyway, in the end, probably I won't go into any further about that, but that's one. My main point here is that when you start trying to make sense of something, you have to be careful what your assumptions are, and you've got to not beg questions. That is, you've got to earn the right to say that politike means political, and then so now. But and so you can see there's a whole bunch of words that have this polis. So polis is the political community. Political, I'm using English now. Then the polites is the person who lives in it, the citizen. And then the politeia is the arrangement of the polis. And then then the question of politike, I've said, is short. When you have the ek ending in Greek, that is understood to mean you're talking about some kind of science or art or thing of that sort. So you say politike, that means political science. If you have the masculine ending, politikos, that also has been, you can now use that as a noun, and that means a person. So then politikos is a person who is and I would say the person who has politike is the politikos, and that's the title of Plato's book, which is usually translated "The Statesman," is politikos. So Aristotle and Plato both have great interest in the question of the politikos, the statesman. It's called statesman because if you say politician, that just sounds too. But the point is that there is the person who is concerned with the polis, with the political community, and if he's good at it and he has knowledge, special knowledge, then the knowledge he will have is politike, and that makes him not just a citizen, but a kind of a citizen who is a special citizen with special knowledge and special influence. And then the other word is politikon, that if you have the neutral, it means something like that which is political, or the political thing, or the political. So you have the neuter, neuter, masculine, feminine, and then the plural politika. So Aristotle's book is called politika, and that's a plural. So it means whatever politike, politikon, politikos is about, it's those things. So you could say it, let's just assume it's the English word political for now to make life easy. So political things, or civic matters, or things having to do with the polis or the running of the city. So that's the title of the politics in Greek is ta politica, and then the Latin is politica. Politica, yeah. Or is it politicus? Yeah. Anyway, so all these words are connected, but before you go galloping off, you want to make sure that you're not assuming anything too soon. And so I just want to say a brief thing then about this notion of there being three kinds of rule. I guess I have said it, and that is that now on the case of despotike, Despotic arche, rule of a master, or Aristotle distinguishes. You can have a slave of somebody who isn't naturally a slave. So he thinks that some people are slavish, and so if you have slavery over slavish people, or people who are by nature slaves, natural slaves, then that's not unjust. Now, it doesn't mean you can do anything you want with them, but the point is the whole attitude is different if you're ruling over naturally slavish people. But generally, if you're dealing with free people, this notion of despotic rule or mastery is the thing which distinguishes good constitutions from bad ones. So, for example, you may have more likely heard of the sixfold division, which Aristotle didn't invent, but you've got rule by one person, rule by a few people, rule by many, and that's divided into a good kind and a bad kind. So rule by one person that's good is kingship. Rule by one person's bad is called tyranny. And by the way, this recording is backwards. So when I say / for the address, it comes across the wrong way. Now, so I don't actually look like that. I look like the opposite of that. And everything behind me is actually the opposite of what it looks like. So keep that in mind. Now, so the thing which makes the difference between a tyrant and a king is that the tyrant rules the citizens as though they are unfree, as though they are slaves. And the problem with that is that he's ruling over not people who are not naturally slaves as though they are slaves. So, and that means he's ruling them for his own benefit. Whereas the king, to be a true king and a good form of rule, has to be acting and ruling for the benefit of all the people he rules, the subjects. Anyway, so despotic rule is used as the standard for what is bad rule when you're talking about people who are not naturally slaves. in terms of the rule of the few, a good rule of the few he calls aristocracy. And that's because that means, and what that means is not what we mean by aristocracy, but aristos means the best. So it's ruled by the best people in society, people who are virtuous people, people who are good people, and they are ruling to make the people in the city that they rule over happy. So that's why political science. Why do I keep doing that? Anyway, well, it makes it more interesting to watch when somebody is doing stuff. But anyway, so that person is ruling them like they are free people. That's like they're kind of like Kantian ends in themselves. So they aren't there for the sake of the ruler. They're rulers. And the bad version of the rule of the few is called oligarchy. But that's on the assumption. Now, in principle, you could have where that's the rule of the rich. Now, you could have a situation where the rich are in charge and they rule, but somehow they're well. If they were all virtuous and ruling for the sake of the people, then they would be rich aristocrats. So that would be aristocracy. But generally speaking, when the rich are in charge, they are not doing that. But if they're not doing that, then they are essentially being despotic. They are ruling for the sake. They're ruling for their own sake, and that's a bad version of the rule of the few. And then finally, you've got the division into the rule of the many, into democracy, which Aristotle views as a bad system, but he means by democracy is the demos means the people, the ordinary people, but he means that and essentially it's the poor who rule because the poor outnumber the rich and the good, and if you have if everybody's vote is equal, then the poor basically come in charge, and if the poor try to exploit the rich and with their power, then that is a deviant form of political rule, well, of a constitution, and the way in which he makes the good version of the rule of the many is institutional, and that is essentially by checks and balances. And so if you make some elements of the Constitution oligarchic, that is, that you put them in the hands of a few, and some things where you let anybody do it in the hands of the poor, carefully arranged, then you will end up with the best system. So that's why sometimes people do call that a republic, because that's kind of what the founding fathers had in mind by making a republic, not a democracy. But for Aristotle, we have to use the word republic's already taken, so we're going to call it a polity. But the thing which distinguishes these three kinds of constitution that in this sixfold system between good ones and bad ones is the question of whether the rulers are ruling for their own sake or for the sake of the people they rule, and that bad deviant form is all a form of despotic rule, but despotic rule, despotic arche, over people who are not actually slaves, and they're by nature free people. So now Aristotle did believe that there were people who were by nature slavish people, and that it was legitimate to kind of conquer them and use them as slaves. And he had in mind that the Greeks were by nature free people, of course, whereas the Persians, basically the barbarians, other people in general, are often slavish by nature. And so if you conquer them in war, and then they can become your slaves, and that is very good for making a good society, because there's lots of work that needs to be done that is not appropriate for free people. So if you, and you can read about this in academia.edu, chicago.academia.edu, chicago.academia.edu/PaulBullen. I wrote about this as the three kinds of rule and Aristotle's ideology. Go to the section where it says the three dimensions of Aristotle's political ideology, because his view was that you could conquer these other countries and then take slaves and have them work in Greece. So that would be legitimate despotic rule, despotic arche. But his idea, in my view, was that there was legitimate political rule, royal rule, kingly rule, but then that required that the king have exceptional virtue. So if you had a person that was just so qualified, so wonderful, that he kind of outweighed everybody else, that in some ways would be the best form of rule if you could find that person and he didn't get corrupted, and you didn't set up a system where the crazy kid takes over and ruins everything. But I think he was making a place for, and this is controversial, but I make the argument in my various writings, that I think he was making a place for the role of the king of Macedonia. So in my view, he allowed for the possibility that it was possible to rule a polis, a city-state, in a way that was a king, and it could be a good system if the king was a good king and did things right. But also generally, I think he viewed that the royal rule by first Philip II and then Alexander the Great, he felt that was legitimate. But then in terms of political rule, that is, his rule was divided among people, either ideally in a polity, that would be the appropriate system within the city-states. But that's an application. I mean, he doesn't. I mean, there's an argument for it, and there's evidence for this view, but that's not. He doesn't come out and say that in so many words. So that you'd have to hear what the argument is to assess it. Anyway, so that's something I wanted to say. And the other thing is that that's the main thing I wanted to say. The other thing that was raised last time was, well, what's the relationship between political science and philosophy? And I'll discuss another time, and theology. That'll discuss another time. I mainly wanted to get back to the question of is political really a translation of politicae? And I would try to show that there's some wrinkles in the situation. So that's it. Again, to go to chicago.academia.edu /Paul. That's Bullen, PaulBullen. That's my name. Paul, B like in boy, Ullen. chicago.academia.edu /PaulBullen, and then you can read up on this and see the argument, not extemporaneously made, and then see where you can look at places in Aristotle to see the text that this is based on. Anyway, have a good day, and I will end this here.